distinguished members of the SADC organ troika, members of the SADC Electoral Advisory Council, chairperson, representatives, and members of the Independent Electoral Commission, distinguished heads of International Electoral Observation Mission, Your Excellencies, heads and representatives of the diplomatic missions accredited to the Republic of South Africa, SADC election observers, leaders and representatives of political parties, representatives of local election observers, religious leaders, and members of the civil society, members of the media, Excellence, chef de mission diplomatique ici à Afrique du Sud, distingués invités, mes chers collègues, mesdames et messieurs. Mkubwa wa mabalozi na mabalozi yote ya Afrika Mashariki, shikamo. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Southern Africa Development Community, SADC, as mandated by His Excellency Mr. Edgar Chagwa Lungu, President of the Republic of Zambia, and the chairperson of the SADC organ on politics, defense, and security cooperation, it is my honor to welcome you to this August event of the release of the SADC Electoral Observation Mission, SIOM's preliminary statement on the conduct of the national and provincial elections in the Republic of South Africa. The mission observed the elections with a total composition of 50 personnel who were deployed to the 9 provinces of the country as part of its mandate. The mission consulted key political stakeholders in South Africa, including government departments, political parties, civil society, research institutions, and the media. The observation of the national elections in all SADC countries is governed by the revised SADC principles and guidelines governing democratic elections 2015, copies of which we will distribute to the participants at this meeting. This preliminary statement covers the mission's observation of the pre-election process and voting day activities. The final report will cover our observation of the post-election process, which include the results, management, announcement, and possible post-election dispute resolution. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me now present a summary of the mission's key findings, which include the political and security environment and the best electoral practices. The political and security environment before, during, and immediately after polling day was generally peaceful. Political campaigns proceeded peacefully in all the 9 provinces, and the campaign rallies that we witnessed were well organized and attended. The mission takes note of the isolated disruptions to the voting process in some of the areas of the country where police clashed with some protesters who attempted to prevent voters from casting their ballots. But the police were equal to the task. The Independent Electoral Commission, IEC, efficiently managed the elections with a few challenges and delivered on the following. Instituting the required measures to accommodate elections involving a record 48 political parties and 10,000 candidates on the National Assembly party list, as well as 8,000 candidates on the Provincial Assembly party list. Accommodated 2 party agents for each party at each one of the 22,924 voting stations. The management of the national and provincial multi-party liaison committees which served as the early warning, discipline, and dispute settlement mechanism, the system managed to avoid aggravating the majority of electoral disputes, and it encouraged non-adversarial dispute resolution. The IEC made effective efforts to enforce the code of conduct for political parties to manage their campaign messages, thus ensuring the mature campaign environment. The election results management system was developed in consultation with the political parties who were given access to test it using their own tools and methods. The system was also verified by an independent audit firm whose services were procured through an open tender. Measures were put in place to enable South Africans in the diaspora to cast their votes at specific South African diplomatic missions abroad. And political party agents were permitted to observe the process up to the moment the ballot boxes were dispatched through customs. More importantly, the IEC extended an invitation for the SIOM to observe diaspora voting in future elections. In accordance with the electoral law, special voting took place on the 6th and 7th May 2019 for voters who were unable to cast their votes on election day. Those who needed special assistance, such as the infirm and senior citizens, were attended to accordingly. A well-instructed and functioning website was created by the IEC to provide for comprehensive voter information, which included the initiative to monitor and counter abusive, inflammatory social media posts. And the IEC provided temporary employment opportunities to the unemployed youth by contracting them as polling staff. The Political Party Funding Act, which came into force on the 1st April 2019, is meant to regulate the private funding of political parties and it sets annual limits for the private donations to political parties in order to prevent the potential corruption influence of money in politics. In this regard, the mission commends the IEC for their professional and impartial management of the election process. The Independent Communication Authority of South Africa, ICASA, regulated and monitored political election broadcast and political advertisements and ensured the equitable treatment of political parties by licensed broadcasters during the election period. ICASA held a session to allocate political election broadcast slots to listed political parties on the 4th April 2019. The ICASA also published the distributed a pamphlet explaining how the political election broadcasts were regulated. The mission observed a high degree of equitable coverage of the election process by the public broadcaster, the Southern Africa Broadcasting Corporation, and equally substantial coverage by private broadcasting stations and print media outlets. The town hall debates that were organized by some private television networks in the promotion of democratic discussions are particularly notable. However, some of the political parties complained of unfair coverage by some media. On election day, mission observed the following at the polling stations that the mission visited. The atmosphere was orderly, calm, and peaceful at all polling stations. Generally, no major instances of concern were observed. 89% of the polling stations we observed were easily accessible to all voters. 58% of the polling stations we observed opened on time. Those that did not were due to slow opening procedures by polling officers, while some experienced relatively minor technical problems with the scanning equipment, and this was rectified within a short period. Our observers noted, in general, opening and closing procedures were properly followed, and voters took on average of 3 minutes to cast their votes. In some instances, the deployment of scanners, zip machines was inconsistent with the number of voters expected in voting centers. Voters exercised their right to a secret vote. In some limited exemptions, the layout of the voting booth did not completely guarantee secrecy. Persons with disabilities, the elderly, and expectant mothers were given priority and assistance to cast their votes. Voting was interrupted at relatively few of the polling stations that we observed for, amongst other reasons, shortage of voting materials, and in some isolated cases, protests, for example, in Northwest KwaZulu-Natal and Limpopo provinces. There were reports that the indelible ink was fading, leading to allegations of double voting, matters which the mission notes that the IEC is currently investigating. A significant number of women employed as polling staff and polling agents was observed. Local observers were present at some of the polling stations. Uniformed police officers were present at all polling stations, and they conducted themselves in a professional manner which did not interfere with the process both within and around the polling stations. And after the close of polling, the process of counting of the votes began immediately at all polling stations, and results were displayed at the polling stations. Our mission observed the following areas of the electoral process and system that require improvement. Voter registration. There are 9.8 million eligible voters who did not register to vote, and of these, 60% are youth. This is despite the fact that the IEC manages continuous voter registration, and supplemented this with voter registration drives the focus on the youth. Proportionally, the youth are the least registered group for voting purposes. Out of 26.7 million registered voters, only 5.7 million voters are below the age of 30 years, this required special attention. The mission further notes that some key stakeholders suggested that socio-economic challenges such as the inequality, poverty, unemployment, coupled with perceived lack of service delivery, which affected the majority of the historically disadvantaged citizens, particularly the youth, may have contributed to voter apathy. Gender representation. Although women constitute 54.5%, 14.7 million of the registered voters, they are far less than 50% of the candidates on the party list for elections. Municipal by-elections. The mission observed that there were municipalities that were conducting by-elections at the same time as the national and provincial elections. The by-elections created additional administrative burdens on the IEC. The system of proportional representation. Some stakeholders expressed concern that the least proportional representation system reduces accountability to the voter, as the individuals retained on the winning party slate are accountable to the political party leaders, not to the constituency, as the latter does not exist. Funding of political parties. Stakeholders expressed concern that the new law on political party funding is yet to become operational, as the IEC was yet to consult stakeholders on the nature of the regulations to be passed for their purpose. Recommendations. In light of the above observations, and considering the issues highlighted by the various stakeholders, the SIOM proposes the following recommendations for the improvement of the electoral process in the Republic of South Africa. Youth voter registration. The IEC Human Sciences Research Council and relevant stakeholders are urged to assess the possible causes of voter apathy amongst young South Africans, with a view of designing and implementing voter and civic education programs to address this apathy. Gender representation. Political stakeholders and the government are urged to consider engaging in consultation to put in place modalities starting at the voting level to increase the representation of women in elected offices in line with the SADC protocol of gender and development, as well as the possibility of introducing legislated gender quotas. Municipal by-elections. The government is urged to consider amending the Municipal Elections Act to ensure that no municipal by-elections are held within 6 months of the national and provincial elections. This practice is quite common in most SADC countries. Funding of political parties. The IEC is urged to expedite the public consultations scheduled to inform the nature of the regulations and operationalize the Political Party Funding Act and implement the new legislation ahead of the local government elections scheduled for 2021. The electoral system. Stakeholders are urged to consider reforms to the electoral system that may introduce a hybrid model, such as the mixed member proportional representation system that is used at the local government level. In conclusion, the SIOM observed that the pre-election and voting phases of the 2019 national and provincial elections were conducted in a professional manner, with transparency in the administration of key elements in the electoral process, thereby fostering electoral integrity. It is also the mission's considered view that the pre-election and voting phases of the national and provincial elections were conducted in line with the Constitution, electoral laws, and other relevant laws of the Republic of South Africa. The mission commends the people of South Africa for their exemplary conduct before and on election day, and urge them to maintain this in post-election period. In accordance with the revised SADC principles and guidelines governing democratic elections, our final report, which will cover the pre-election, election and post-election phases, will be issued within 30 days of the end of the electoral cycle. Thank you very much. Muito obrigado. Merci beaucoup. Asante sana. Shukran.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, the Honorable Minister Malanji, Foreign Minister of the Republic of Zambia and Head of the SADC Electoral Observation Mission to the Republic of South Africa. At this juncture, we wish to welcome His Excellency Dr. Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete, former President of the United Republic of Tanzania and Head of the African Union Electoral Observation Mission to the Republic of South Africa, to deliver his statement. Your Excellency, we welcome you to this event. Thank you very much.
Well, Excellencies, fellow observers, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to the joint African Union SADC Election Observation Missions press conference. I would like to begin by expressing our profound gratitude to His Excellency Glenn Mashinini, Chairperson of the Independent Electoral Commission of the Republic of South Africa, for inviting the African Union to observe the 2019 national and provincial elections. After receiving the invitation, His Excellency Musa Faki Mahamat, the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, appointed a group of 32 observers under my leadership. The goal of the African Union Election Observation Mission is to make an independent, objective, and impartial assessment of the electoral process, and where necessary, make recommendations for improved management of elections in member states in accordance with key international normative frameworks and national laws. The African Union Election Observation Mission deployed 11 teams of observers in the provinces of Mpumalanga, Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, Free State, Northwest, Western Cape, and Limpopo. I have the honor to present this preliminary statement, which is made while the electoral process has not yet been concluded. The final report will be presented 2 months after the elections. The preliminary report covers the preparation period and the election day on voting and counting of the ballots. Soon after arrival and before the election day, the mission held consultations with the chairman of the Independent Electoral Commission, representatives of political parties, and the SADC, ECF, and ASA observation missions, and other stakeholders. These consultations deepened our understanding of the state of preparedness and the political context of this election. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the AU mission observed the elections as being held at a time when the internal socio-political context is largely characterized by the following. One, that there has been a significant broadening of electoral participation as evidenced by the increased number of contesting political parties from 25 in 2014 to 48 this year, and the high number of registered voters. There are 26.7 million. Two, that there are grievances of a land redistribution, allegations of state corruption, protests related to social service delivery, and voter apathy among the youth. Three, there is continuity of the system of proportional representation, which invariably ensures inclusivity and guarantees that every vote counts. Also, that deliberate decisions have been taken to make a legal framework, and a legal framework has been put in place which provides for the participation of all South Africans in the electoral process, including the diaspora, homebound voters, and prisoners. The African Union Mission noted with appreciation the passing of the Political Party Funding Act 2018, although it's not yet in force. The Act provides for disclosure of private donations to political parties and places caps on the amount of private funding that a party can receive. When implemented, the law will go a long way towards advancing integrity and equity in the electoral process in South Africa. As alluded to earlier, the African Union Mission visited the Independent Electoral Commission and held discussions with its chairperson and his senior officials. The idea was to know the level of preparedness of the IEC to organize the elections. It is the view of the mission that the IEC was well prepared or is well prepared and able to conduct the elections well and in a professional and transparent manner and in accordance with the relevant laws governing elections in South Africa. Despite concerns from some stakeholders about the competence of the IEC ad hoc staff at the local level, the mission observed that the elections proceeded generally well and within a conducive environment that ensured that the citizens exercised their right to vote freely. Ladies and gentlemen, the mission appreciated the serious efforts made to ensure that the rights of participation of women, youth, and persons with disabilities in the political process are guaranteed. In this regard, the mission commends the high level participation of women, who constituted 55% of registered voters, 43.7% of candidates, and 73% of polling officials. The mission expresses concern that only 18.5% of youth in the 18 to 19 age bracket registered to vote. This is a matter of serious concern which requires urgent attention, since a significant proportion of first-time voters and citizens were disenfranchised. Equally significant, the AU mission was delighted to note the improvement made in the infrastructure and other measures that enabled persons living with disabilities to participate effectively in the electoral process. These included the provision of voting aids such as the universal ballot template, which helped the visually impaired voters to exercise their democratic right. Furthermore, persons with physical disability benefited from the special voting arrangements. The African Union Observer Mission noted that the political campaign activities were generally peaceful, and the political parties were able to campaign freely and had the opportunity to transmit their messages and their political agendas without undue encumbrances. With regards to security, the AU mission observed that arrangements put in place to ensure adequate security for the elections worked well. Security personnel were reported to be visible at 97% of the voting stations our people observed. The collaboration between the IEC, the security agencies, and the participating political parties through the political party liaison committees created a conducive environment for the conduct of the elections. Ladies and gentlemen, the mission commends the media for the important role they played in informing the South African general public, in educating the electorate, and in communicating the messages of political parties at the various stages of the electoral process. The mission lauds the prevailing press freedom in South Africa and noted with appreciation the way the state broadcaster accorded equitable coverage to the political parties. The mission welcomed the efforts made by the Independent Electoral Commission to combat disinformation on the digital platforms. Ladies and gentlemen, the mission observed that the special voting process was conducted well. We commend South Africa for creating this kind of mechanism, which provides opportunity for voters who cannot travel to their voting stations due to physical infirmity, disability, or pregnancy, and those on official duty on election day. The mission urges other African member states, AU member states, to emulate this laudable practice. On election day, the mission observed the opening, voting, closing, and counting of the votes in 94 urban and 26 rural centers. Generally, the voting was conducted in a calm, peaceful, and orderly manner, which afforded the people of South Africa the opportunity to exercise their democratic rights of choosing their party and their leaders. We noted and heard reports of existence of a few isolated incidents where voting was disrupted. However, we are of the opinion that they would not affect the outcome of the elections. We also observed that most polling stations opened on time, except for a few for reasons related to late arrival of polling materials. Opening procedures were observed, and ballot boxes were correctly sealed and placed in clear view of all voters. Polling stations were laid out in a manner that allowed for easy flow of voters. Difficulties were observed, however, in a few polling stations where the rooms were a bit small. Procedures for identification of voters were followed, and those who did not meet the qualifications were not allowed to vote. The set procedures of closing the polls and counting of the votes were also followed. Generally, polling officials demonstrated a high level of professionalism and competence in discharging their duties. Persons with disability, the elderly, the expectant, and nursing mothers were given the consideration they deserved for voting ahead of the others. As high as 93% of voting stations visited were accessible to persons with disabilities. Voters requiring assistance were assisted by persons of their choice or by presiding officers in the presence of party agents. There was conspicuous presence of party agents from the different political parties at the voting stations. Observers reported that party agents seemed conversant with their role and were unimpeded while discharging their duties. International and domestic observers were also present in many of these polling stations visited. Recommendations. Based on these findings, the African Union Electoral Observer Mission offers the following recommendations for consideration. 1, the government and the broader South African society should find ways to address the problem of youth participation in the political process. This matter requires urgent attention in our view. 2, the government should expedite the implementation of the Political Party Funding Act 2018 to increase electoral integrity and transparency in future elections. 3, the IEC should continue with the special voting initiative. The mission encourages other African countries to emulate this laudable practice in order to ensure inclusivity in the electoral process. 4, the state media should continue with the good practice of providing equitable coverage to political parties. The mission also encourages the private media to explore the possibility of doing the same. Whereas, number 5, whereas the mission commends the IEC for the successful conduct of the elections, the professionalism and the integrity demonstrated, we implore the mission to continue, we implore the Commission to continue to aspire for higher levels of excellence. Number six, but not least, we appeal to the political stakeholders and all the people of South Africa to ensure that peace, harmony, and stability prevail in this great and beautiful nation. They should avoid making election-related problems cause for breakdown of peace, unity, and stability, as it has been the experience in a number of African countries. In the event of feeling aggrieved, avenues of dialogue or seeking redress through the justice system should be the best way to do it. In view of the findings and the recommendations, the initial conclusions of the African Union Electoral Observer Mission are the following. 1, the 8th May 2019 South African national and provincial elections were peaceful, transparent, inclusive, and credible. The people of South Africa were given the opportunity to elect partisan and therefore leaders of their choice freely. 2, the 2019 elections satisfied the African Union and the international standards for democratic elections. 3, the African Union Observer Mission commends the various stakeholders for their invaluable contribution, which contributed to the achievement of this outcome. In this regard, we would like to recognize the government, the Republic of South Africa, the people of South Africa, the Independent Electoral Commission, political parties, the security agencies, civil society organization, the media, and several or many others. 4, last, as I said earlier, the final report is just to remind you that the final report of the African Union Election Observer Mission will be released approximately two months after the elections. It will contain, as I said, a detailed assessment of the electoral process and recommendations, and it will be shared by the government, will be shared with the government of South Africa and the Independent Electoral Commission and other AU member states. In conclusion, let me say that the South African democracy is young compared to other countries in Africa, but has come of age fast. The level of transparency, excellence in management and delivery attained is exemplary. We in the African Union Election Observer Mission implore the people of South Africa to safeguard the gains and keep striving to attain the greatest heights possible going forward. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. We'll now invite His Lordship, the Chief Justice, the Justice Iso Chulu, the Chairperson of the Electoral Commission of the Republic of Zambia and Head of the SADC Electoral Commission's Forum Observation Mission to the Republic of South Africa, to deliver his interim statement. Thank you. Thank you.
I was just saying that, you see, I've been promoted to be Chief Justice, you know. Indeed. Your Excellency, Dr. Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete, former President of the United Republic of Tanzania and head of the African Union Electoral Observation Mission to the Republic of South Africa, Honorable Joseph Milanji, Minister of Foreign Affairs and head of SADC Observation Mission, who has just left, but indeed ably represented by Honorable Kawinda Pande, former Foreign Affairs Minister of the Republic of Zambia, and who is alternate of the SADC Electoral Observation Mission. Your Excellency, Dr. Stegomena Lawrence Tax, Executive Secretary of SADC, Chairperson and representative members of the Independent Electoral Commission, distinguished heads of International Electoral Observation Mission, Your Excellencies, heads and representatives of the diplomatic missions accredited to the Republic of South Africa, election observers, leaders and representatives of political parties, representatives of local election observers, members of the media, religious leaders and members of civil society, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. The Electoral Commission's Forum of SADC countries observer mission comprises electoral management bodies of the SADC member states. The mandate of the ECF SADC is to strengthen cooperation amongst electoral commissions and promote conditions conducive for credible and transparent elections in the SADC region. The ECF SADC Election Observer Mission to the national and provincial elections of the Republic of South Africa was led by the Speaker, which was the Chairperson of the Electoral Commission of Zambia. The mission comprised 25 observers from the electoral commissions of Angola, Botswana, Eswatini, Malawi, Tanzania, Namibia, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. The mission commenced its work on the 28th of April 2019, and the mission deployed 6 teams to Gauteng, Northwest, Free State, Mpumalanga, Limpopo provinces. The preliminary statement will be available to this audience and shall have details of the following: introduction and background, mandate of the ECF SADC Election Observation Mission, guiding principles, observation methodology, and pre-election phase activities. For purposes of this representation of release of statements by international observer missions, a summary of which I'm going to present shall focus on the preliminary findings, election phase, which I mentioned earlier on, and areas for improvement or recommendations. The state of preparedness by the Independent Electoral Commission of South Africa. The mission interacted with the Independent Electoral Commission of South Africa to gather information related to the 2019 national and provincial elections and assess its state of preparedness. The Commission confirmed its readiness to conduct these elections, highlighting challenges they faced in the build-up to the elections, which included poor youth voter registration, an item that has been noted by both missions previously, covering the ages of 18 to 19 years, in that only registered 18.5% of the total registered voters. Incomplete compliance with court directive on the capturing of physical addresses on the voters' roll. Increased number of political parties on ballot papers and attendant logistics. These related to cost of printing, procurement of additional ballot boxes, and redesigning of ballot papers. Logistical arrangements related to the need to accommodate two-party agents for participating political parties at a voting station, which translated to 96 party agents per station. Other pre-election findings on the positive perspectives include the mission that notes the peaceful environment that has characterized the campaign period ahead of these elections. Adequate readiness by IEC to conduct forthcoming elections. Stakeholder confidence in the IEC. Measures which were undertaken on disinformation. And the stakeholders raised a number of cross-cutting issues which they believed had an effect on voter behavior, voter turnout, and political party campaigns. These concerns included the following: lack of service delivery and consequent public protests, politically motivated killings which took place ahead of elections during the nomination period, specifically in KwaZulu-Natal and Mpumalanga provinces, xenophobic attacks on foreign nationals, corruption scandals, late enactment of legislation on political party funding, low voter registration among the youth, which translated to 18.5% of the total registered voters. And the following observations on the podium were noted: that most of voting stations visited opened on time and opening procedures were followed. Some voting stations opened late due to problems with the scanners, the zipstick. Layout in voting stations allowed for smooth flow of voters. There were inconsistencies in the positioning of ballot booths, which had the potential to compromise the secrecy of the vote. Signage to voting stations was visible. Voters with special needs were given priority to vote. Persons with disabilities were assisted, and it was further noted that a number of voting stations, mostly schools and churches, had ramps which facilitated access to persons with disabilities. International and domestic observers were visible at most voting stations visited. Most political parties were not represented by party agents at those voting stations visited. Political campaign materials were visible at voting stations, and some voters wore party regalia. Voters' roll was efficiently managed. Voters appearing on the voters' rolls without addresses were allowed to complete forms to enable them to vote. Similarly, it was observed that other voters who filled in forms for various queries caused delays. Some voting stations had only one ballot box for both national and provincial elections, where others had separate boxes. Women were well represented in the complement of polling staff. In general, staff seemed adequately trained to perform their duties. A number of voting stations visited comprised young polling staff and party agents. Security personnel were visible and did not interfere with the voting process. Generally, polling took place in a peaceful and secure environment. Now, the lessons learned. The following lessons were drawn from the 2019 national and provincial elections of the Republic of South Africa to be adopted as best practices in the SADC region. One, the provision of adjustable polling booth used by voters with disabilities, the PWDs. Two, professionalism of the IEC commissioners and senior officials in the handling of electoral matters at both national and provincial levels. Three, the innovative and effective facilities applied in the Results Operations Center, the ROC, and in the Provincial Results Operations Centers are impressive. Four, regular live television and radio updates by IEC to the public were noted as a good practice. Five, initiative by the IEC to timelessly deal with election-related disinformation. Six, creation of voting substations, the streams, is an ideal practice to address congestion. Seven, the 2019 Excel election slogan by IEC was innovative. The IEC's use of various social media platforms was commendable. The use of technology, e.g. scanner, zip, to verify and identify voters was equally commendable. Recommendations. The IEC SADC mission makes the following recommendations for consideration. One, that there is a need for consistency in the administration of some of the election processes at voting stations. For example, inking before issuance of ballot papers, identification of polling staff, positioning of polling booths, and labeling of ballot boxes. Two, the law that allows voters to wear political party colors during voting should be revisited. Three, that the use of mobile phones inside voting stations should be prohibited. Four, that political parties should be encouraged to observe gender parity in line with the SADC gender protocol. Five, research should be undertaken to identify causes of low voter registration by the youth. In conclusion, ECF SADC mission commends the Independent Electoral Commission of South Africa for efficiently managing the 2019 national and provincial elections. Two, the mission also congratulates the people of South Africa on the peaceful manner in which they conducted themselves during this period. Five, and final, the EC SADC encourages the people of South Africa to remain tolerant and peaceful ahead of the announcement of election results. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Justice Chulu. The head of the Electoral Commission's Forum of SADC countries.
All right, you are watching a joint African Union and SADC observer mission present.
The statements that have been delivered here will be made available outside, just outside of this hall. As you go out, you could pick up a copy. Also, may I take this opportunity to invite the technical teams or advisors to the respective missions to take up their seats at the top table. Thank you very much. I think there's somebody from the AU and the ECF. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we will now open the discussion or open up the floor for questions or comments. Please identify yourselves, your name and organization that you represent, And please keep your questions short so that we may give an opportunity to most people around here to ask questions. Madam, I'll start with you and then you, sir.
Thank you.
My name is Sophie Mugwena from the South African Broadcasting Corporation, the public broadcaster. President Kikwete, I just want to find out, there are complaints of people have raised concerns around the issue of multiple voting. For example, saying that the ink, it's easy to remove the ink. In terms of your observations, or perhaps did you receive any reports around that issue? And the other question is to improve the electoral system on the continent. The issue of electronic voting. We currently have countries that have started, but it's a mixed process where you use certain processes electronically, otherwise you also go manual. What is it that can be done to improve the electoral processes and systems on the continent?
Good morning, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. I am Jean-Jacques Cornish from Eyewitness News, an independent news network in South Africa, and Radio France International. I'm wanting to ask the heads of the missions their response to the claim made by 30 of the 48 parties last night that the elections were not free and fair, and they are now instituting legal action in that regard. Do you believe that is justified, or if I could just get your response? Thank you.
Any other questions? There's another question behind you.
Thank you.
I'll take 5.
Okay, thank you. My name is Govin Whittles. I'm with the ENCA News Channel here in South Africa. Similar to the question asked by my colleague, I would like to find out whether the heads of missions believe that the electoral court challenge being considered and pursued by the 15 parties who have objected to the free and fairness of the election should be concluded before the election could be considered free and fair. And does the heads of missions believe that the IEC should conclude its investigation into allegations of double voting and give its verdict before the results are announced? Thank you.
Any other question for now? Okay, one more. Over there, yes, sir. There's a question over there.
During observation, my name is Philip Makabongo. I come from Kenya. What can we do about the standardization of a mark? Because in South Africa, I understand there was a case law which allows for any type of a mark. And yesterday, I observed one voter, a marking of a voting paper. Yes, so I realized that some people were marking the party at the picture or portrait of the party or of a person and vice versa. What should be the standard of marking? Number 2, on the same note, we also realized a few abnormalities whereby somebody scribbles just something, not a mark, at the point where the mark X should be put. What should we do about that to give the presiding officers direction? Thank you.
Your Excellencies, may I invite you to respond to these questions? I think there were some specific ones directed at His Excellency President Kikwete, but there are also other questions that have been directed generally to the panel. I hand over to Your Excellencies.
SABC asked me the issue of multiple voting. Did you receive complaints? The issue of electronic voting. What is it that can be done to improve voting? Of course, the issue of multiple voting there has been no complaint that has been received by any of our observers on the ground. But of course, we've heard about it. So we wanted to see if we heard, we did not get complaints, but we are privy to that complaint that has been raised by the political parties. The issue of electronic voting is what is it that can be done to improve voting? Of course, electronic voting is desirable. Every country has its own system. Some use electronic voting, some use manual. Well, I'm sure as we evolve and grow and improve, we'll get there. But right now, you say if every country should use electronic voting, well, you have to ensure that the internet is there, the mobile phone penetration is there. If you have to use, I think it is something that as we grow, there will come a time when we will get there. But it is desirable. I think it is much more efficient. It is faster. It is faster. And if there is no hacking, because that is the other aspect of it. If there is no hacking, yes, because if there is hacking, somebody may intercept it midway, and you send a figure of 10,000, he sends a figure of 100,000. Yes. So if there is no hacking, if the system is insulated enough, I think it is the best way that we can do it, the fastest way we can do it. Well, these other questions were general. What is your views on the claims by 30 political parties that elections are not free and fair? We're not free and fair. Well, I think, what is my view? These parties have decided to go to court. I think that's the best way. If you feel aggrieved, and there are provisions of taking your case to the courts of law, I think that's the best option. I think that's what I can say. My personal views may be seen as interference in the legal processes that are about to be instituted by these parties. I spare my views on that one. The court challenge should be concluded before announcement, before we pronounce ourselves as the elections are free and fair, or well, we have our own template of observing elections. If by our own templates we are satisfied, we will do it. Court case or not case or no court case, because we are different people. Those who feel aggrieved go to court, but for us, each one of us here has a set of procedures, has a set of standards that they follow. We will decide on the basis of the standards that our respective institutions have put in place. What can we do to standardize marking in Africa? I think to demand that there's going to be one standard of marking in Africa, I think that is demanding too much. As long as in the country there is concurrence that by doing this, you have marked, you have voted. You are from Kenya. Yes. I'm from Tanzania. We in East Africa use the tick. Here they use the X. In our case, if somebody uses the X, In school, it is wrong. You got it wrong. So if in the Tanzanian case, if where you are supposed to vote, if you put an X, then it means that you don't like the man. But here, if you put the X, you have voted for him. So I think this is a trivial matter. I don't think we should bother about it. I think we leave it to countries to decide, whatever system. I observed elections in Nigeria. They use the thumb. They use the fingerprint to vote. We say that. So I think it's not a matter that we should labor discussing it. I don't. It's a trivial matter in my view. But if you think it's important, well.
Not exactly that one.
Yes.
The position, you may decide an X or a tick, but somebody marks even the face of a person, ignoring the place where the name is put. So that is false.
Of course, if that is what you mean, it will again depend upon the electoral procedures and the electoral law, how to determine that a ballot is valid. That's all. If marking on the face is valid, or marking on the box is valid, it will depend upon the electoral laws and the electoral regulations of that particular country. We cannot create standards on that one. Yes.
You know, what His Excellency has said is perfectly correct. It's again the issue of voter education. It's the issue of voter education. During the period of voter education, each of these AMBs educate the electorate where an X or a tick should be placed. For example, back home in Zambia, there is a box which is provided on the ballot paper. And therefore, you are required to mark your X. Unlike what His Excellency has said, that when you mark an X, you don't like the person. But you're indicating that's your preferred candidate. So you put the X inside the box. If that X extends outside the box, that ballot paper will be disqualified, spoiled. Similarly, I'd like to believe here that in Tanzania, Your Excellency, where you put your tick, the tick must lie inside the box. If you place your tick outside the box, that is invalid, ballot paper. It won't be counted. So the education is place your tick or your X in the place specified by the EMB. But indeed, there's variation whether you use a tick or you use an X. It's a question of where you place it. Anywhere outside you see the specified, box will cause the ballot paper to be invalid. Yes, whether you use the fingerprint, that fingerprint is a specific place where it should lie. Now, some people, will decide to put, the X, somewhere else, or indeed, at the back of the ballot paper. That is malicious anyway. Better stay away from, voting, because you know very well, if you're going to mark on the back of the ballot paper, obviously, that ballot paper will not be counted. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me also just add on, starting from where Justice Chula has ended. Where they use a thumb. Some thumbs are very big. When you press, it will be in the person you want, and it overflows into the next one. Then it becomes invalid. So let me make also a comment on the double voting. We're aware that the IEC is following up that case, so we are grateful that they are following it up. They are actively following to establish the truth, and if there will be any culprits, they'll be taken to court. So it's something which they're taking up. They've not ignored it. And on the issue of the release of the elections, that they should not release until after this, it's according, what are the laws? They'll follow the laws of this country. What do they say? So this panel cannot determine or cannot institute or cannot direct to say you do this until this is finalized. They have to follow the laws of the country. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Will the panel take one last round? If there is one. Follow-up question from SABC, and there's another one behind there. So, Madam, please proceed.
To ensure credibility of elections, many believe that it's better for the observer missions to arrive on time and not to leave immediately. I just want to find out from President Kikwete, when are you leaving? I just want to make an example of Kenya. When there was this type of dispute in Kenya in 2017, the head of the AU mission then, former President Thabo Mbeki, had to take a decision not to leave so that this matter is resolved by either those who are aggrieved saying will go to court and a finality, you know. Are you going to wait for the IEC to pronounce in terms of their audit on these complaints, but also for perhaps the opposition parties who are not happy to take the matter to court, not to wait for the entire court hearing, but just to tidy up these outstanding issues?
Well, I intend to be there until the announcements of the results, but not until the conclusion of the court cases.
Thank you. It's Govin Whittles again. I see that there were different recommendations from different... I'm over here.
Sorry, just for SADC. SADC, that's why we say that after this, the final report will come 30 days within, and there will be a follow-up.
Taken by the EFF, as well, United Christian Democratic Movement also.
Oh, well, it's unfortunate that we lost the audio with Colin there, but I'm sure our other programs On Point, which is up next, Colin, they will bring Colin back in and give us an update with regards to the IEC Centre in Maiking. That was Colin Lemawane at the IEC Centre in Maiking. Folks, that's how we wrap things up. Stand by. On Point is up next. For myself, Blaine Herman, have yourself a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.